Okay. Hello. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Adoption Happy Hour brought to you by NAAP. We are the National Association of Adoptees and Parents, where it is our mission to unify the adoption community and elevate our diverse voices by promoting dialogue, understanding, and healing through education, awareness, and connection. I am Beth Steury, filling in tonight along with Jennifer Falsing for Marcy, who is on vacation, as we already mentioned. We also have fellow board member Barb Robertson joining us tonight. It's wonderful to have each and every one of you, and please say hello in the chat if you would like, especially if it happens to be your first time joining us. Please let us know that. We do have a bit of housekeeping to take care of before we introduce our guest. We ask that you remain on mute during the presentation. You can raise your virtual hand or your real hand to be recognized. You may post in the comments, in the chat, comments or questions. We want to remind you that this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential. And portions of this event will be recorded and may be shared on our private happy hour group Facebook page and then on our YouTube channel. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thought, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. Okay, Jennifer has some slides to show about some of our programming and upcoming events.
Yeah, let's start with just our other programming. So, of course, tonight's happy hour. So that is on the 1st and the 3rd. On the 18th of July, registration is currently open for Dr. Joyce, Putting Yourself Together After Reunion. Amber, her program is typically the 2nd Thursday, but her kids are out of school for the summer, so she's taking July off. She'll be back in August with First Families, and Amber is a new board member for NAAP. And then Danielle Gaudette with Self-Love Essentials for the Adoption Constellation is the last Thursday. That is not currently open for registration, but it will be soon. And speaking of happy hour, while I'm here, our next happy hour will be Paige Strickland, The Adoptee Flight. And I have read her presentation. It's typical Paige. It's great. It's brilliant. She brings all different kinds of things in, but a flight meaning like a tasting, a sampling of. So these are like a sampling of the different things that helped her in Search and Reunion. So it'll be very interesting. And then we have our mini meetup, and Beth has done so much work on this. I will bring up the screens and let her tell you about it.
Okay, this will be our 2nd annual mini meetup. We will be hosting it September 15th and 16th in Angola, Indiana at the Pokagon State Park. We had a small group gathered last year and we had a fabulous time. It's not only a beautiful setting, but it was just this really cool retreat-like feel where you could just hang out, relax, and be together in the beauty of nature. And we have a fabulous keynote speaker, Patricia Knight-Meyer, and our whole focus is going to be journeying together toward healing. And you can see a variety of other folks who will be sharing some of their, if we want to call it, their best bets for the healing journey, things that worked for them. 2 other opportunities, the Bear Witness Project by Toda World, and this was begun at the summit where people can record their story. Someone from Toda World will be there giving you the opportunity to just sit down and tell your story and have it recorded, and it will join the others who have done that. We also have a professional photographer coming who has volunteered to take headshots for a donation to NAAP. For whatever reason you might want a headshot, she'll also be taking photos of our event, but we are really, really happy to have those additional things. I also will make note of Lorraine Dusky. Saturday afternoon, there's a big chunk of free time where you get to choose what you want to do. If it's sit by the lake, if it's go off in a wooded area and write or draw, we're going to have materials for you to do that. But Lorraine Dusky will be leading a book club on her revised book that was just recently published, Hole in My Heart. So we're really, really looking forward to that. At some point, Jennifer will be dropping some links in the chat. We need you to register. We need you to reserve your room. Okay. We wanted to show you not only the beautiful lake out front, but this is the inn. Okay. Sometimes people think, oh, State Park, this might be like a super rustic place. And maybe you like rustic or maybe you don't. This is just a very modern hotel. And you can see the pool there, the lounges, different things like that. So we need you to make your reservation because our room block will expire July 31st. We have a great rate of $125.99 plus tax for a 2-queen room. So information will be in the chat and we've been posting it everywhere. So you shouldn't have trouble.
And David Bowl I have a lake home just right off those Adirondack chairs, just off to the right, left. David Bowl has already enlisted me to give people boat rides. I want boat rides. And on that front lawn, weather permitting, we're going to have a bonfire one of the evenings. So
yeah, Friday evening after our getting together inside, we're planning to head out to the beach for a campfire. So if you can join us, please do so.
Yep. And then for anybody who did Untangling Our Roots, I got to find the screen again. I'm going to have to jump over there. We are doing a second summit. We were thinking, well, maybe we'll wait and, take a year off. That wasn't what the feedback that we got. So Beth and Cara and I, or whatever we want to call ourselves, the crazy people, thought we were getting a break after doing all the debriefing of everybody afterwards. Nope, we're right back in to planning. So I wanted to give you a little glimpse at the teaser video that we have out because no one else has seen it. So you guys are getting to see something special here.
Okay, we are excited about Summit 2024, and you're going to be hearing a lot about that. We really thought we were going to wait till 2025 to do another, but it was like 98% of the feedback said we want it next year. So that's what we're doing. We jumped right in again. So, okay, I think we're finished, Jen?
Yep, we are good.
Okay, we are ready to go. So we have a very special guest here with us tonight. We welcome to Happy Hour, Carlyn Montes De Oca, a multi-award-winning author, international speaker, animal human health expert, passionate animal advocate, and former film editor. Carlyn holds a bachelor's degree in communication arts and a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine. She is also certified in plant-based nutrition. A sought-after speaker and founder of the Animal Human Health Connection, Carlyn frequently speaks on the powerful ways human health, happiness, and longevity are improved through our connection with our animal companions. Carlyn lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, with her husband, Ken Fisher, and her beloved rescue dog, Grace. Her latest book, a #1 Amazon bestseller, Junkyard Girl, a memoir of ancestry, family secrets, and second chances, was published in October of 2022. It is so good to have you with us, Carlyn.
Thank you, Beth. Thanks for that introduction.
Oh, you are welcome. You guys can't believe or understand how excited I was when, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or so, NAAP got a message from Carlyn saying that she had heard we had a happy hour program and would we consider her as a guest? Well, Carlyn didn't know who she was writing to because she and I, maybe a month prior to that, had been conversing because I had just finished reading Junkyard Girl. And I loved it so much. I couldn't help myself. I reached out to her on Facebook. Became Facebook friends. We started chatting, and then here she was coming to us saying, would you be interested in me being on the program? And of course, that was a very, very easy yes for us to say, we would love to have you be a guest on Happy Hour. So that is how we got here. And we're just going to jump right in. And Carlyn, let's begin with you telling us about your family and your growing up years.
Well, I grew up in, if anybody's familiar with Carpinteria, California, just south of Santa Barbara. I mean, its infamy is that it's called the world's safest beach there. So I grew up there, and I am I'm Mexican American. My parents were immigrants from Mexico. I had 2 brothers and a sister I grew up with, and I had dogs, those were my friends growing up. I will admit I was a little lonely. I was pretty lonely growing up. Both my parents actually, one part of what made things a little difficult was that they were hoarders. So there was just so much stuff everywhere, and they were very overprotective of me. So I found a lot of comfort in the animals that surrounded me when I was growing up. And although I say all that, there's my parents and I, there was a lot of love in our family, and there was also a lot of tension. And little did I know that there was a big secret in that house, which was me. I had no idea at the time that I was adopted, and this was not my family, my biological family, and that these were not my siblings, were not related to me by blood. So everything, I tootled along through life, and I only found out 4 years ago that I was adopted through a DNA test that I just took for fun.
Okay, so tell us about your siblings and where are you in the lineup of your siblings?
I am the last by 9 years. So my sister follows right after me, 9 years older, and then my 2 brothers, who are 13 and 14 years older than I am.
Okay, definitely the baby of the family, right?
The baby.
Okay, so now are your parents still living?
Unfortunately, no, they passed away a number of years ago.
Okay, so tell us more about the relationship you had with your siblings.
Well, I to this day, I adore my siblings. I just think that they, for me, they walk on water. They were just always so protective of me and so loving as siblings. There's a lot of teasing going on in our family, a lot of laughter. But my sister in particular was extremely protective of me. And I had no idea, that my mother had sort of instilled that in her. And, but anyway, and to this day, she's extremely protective of me, and she and I have a very close relationship, not knowing we had this big secret between us. And my brothers were the same way. My husband brought up the other day, he said, he mentioned that one of my boyfriends I had, actually, who he's friends with, he said, yeah, I never wanted to meet her brothers because I was scared if I ever broke up with her, they'd come after me. So we had it was a lot of laughter, lots of teasing. They were all very smart, and I always looked up to them, and I still do.
Now, you are enough younger that you would have been in the home alone for a while.
I was.
Okay, so tell us a little bit more about that time.
Yeah, that was a tough time because before I was a teenager, I kind of I looked at things differently as a kid might. I looked my parents had all this hoarded stuff in the backyard, in the house, and I was looking at it all as, these are shields I can use, or these are these legs that used to belong to a table can be my spears. And I was like kind of just in this little magical world. And as I became a teenager, that's when my siblings all left to go to college, and they were gone. And suddenly I was alone and feeling terribly lonely. And in those years, you start kind of really paying attention to maybe how other people see you and other people look at you. And I started, I was feeling like, whoa, nobody else lives like this. This is really weird. And I started seeing how other people who knew that my parents were hoarders and we had all this stuff were looking at me. And I started getting, my self-esteem started to go down. And also as a child of immigrants, my parents had a very different way of looking at at our culture. Like they were very proud of their Hispanic culture and they wanted us to be proud of it. And I just wanted to be, Lori Partridge from the Partridge Family. I just wanted to be an all-American kid. I didn't want all that stuff. And so there were many things that started coming between myself and my parents, who were the only ones in the house. And especially my mother and I, my mother being so stubborn and so stoic and so strong. And even though I apparently was not her blood related child, I was all the same things, and we started having our own little war, and that went on for some time.
Did you feel like they treated you differently than your siblings?
I had to relook at everything once I knew the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I just thought, well, I don't know, I don't know. I didn't think of it. And now I think that maybe so. I mean, they certainly were so overprotective. And I understand now that from everything that was explained, that their reasoning for not telling me at least began with, it was the 60s and children out of wedlock were not treated well. And they thought, well, and they were also from Mexico, where children out of wedlock were really not treated well. They didn't want that for me. And they didn't want that stigma to follow me. So they decided to keep it all quiet and in secret. So now that I think about it, I think of little things that my mother may have said or ways she was different, but I believe that my mother was always really concerned that one day I would find out. Somebody would, I have 63 first cousins and almost all of them knew. I mean, I have a massive family and everybody knew I was adopted except me. So I think everybody was a little wary of, at some point, somebody's going to slip, somebody's going to say something. So, and I believe in many ways, my mother and I my sister was a lot easier to control, my older sister. She pretty much did everything my parents said. And she was, the good girl. And I was just like, oh, man, I just wanted to do the opposite if they said it. So I do think there were some ways that maybe I was treated differently, but it certainly was not even conscious on my, when I was growing up for me.
Well, and part of it could be attributed to that large gap. Because when you're parenting 4 kids, it's different than basically when you're parenting 1. True. So, as a kid, all of that's going to kind of swirl together. But of course, when we look back, we always see things differently. But while you were in the home, were there ever any clues that this just might not be your biological family?
You mean because everybody was a giant except me?
Okay, that's one thing, huh?
My brothers are 6'3" and 6'4". My sister's 5'5" or 5'6" or something like that. I'm 5'3" and I'm barely 5'3". And I look like nobody in my family. I mean, my father is very light skinned. He has green eyes. And 2 of my siblings, except for the green eyes, look just like him. And my other brother's so tall. And everybody would ask me, they're like, how come you don't look like anybody in your family? And I always figured, oh, there's just one person who maybe doesn't. But it's not only that I didn't look like them, I didn't act like them. I didn't act like anybody in my entire 63 first cousin extended family. I to this day, everybody says you're the one that's different. And now I get it why I am different. I'm so different. And I guess there were little clues that people were saying that I wasn't paying attention to. So, you know what? If anybody's looking for a private detective, don't hire me. I'm obviously not qualified to do that.
But it didn't ever go so far as for you to think, I wonder if I'm adopted.
Well, this is the funny thing. I believe that our unconscious pretty much knows everything. I mean, even like I think about, and you've read my book, so you know how it opens, that I was 11 years old and my dogs were my best friends. And I'd sit in this big old kennel my dad had made for the dogs. And I'd sit on top of their falling apart, dog houses. And I'd just be looking up at the sky, at the clouds, and just thinking, when are my real parents coming for me? Gosh, I know this can't be my family. This can't be it. I know they will come for me one day. And I guess maybe a lot of kids daydream and think of things like that, but I thought it a lot, and I don't know where those thoughts came from. One thing is that my bedroom where I grew up was right next to the kitchen, and the kitchen was where all conversations were held. And there were many times I'd wake up kind of from a deep sleep and hear just various whispers. And then as soon as my parents knew I was awake, they'd be quiet. And I sometimes wonder if maybe I heard something. I do. I think it might be in there somewhere that I might, on some level, but you don't know.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. That's really, I remember at my grandma's, there was this vent in the ceiling, and we would lay and hear the conversations in the kitchen, but we didn't hear any secrets, anything like what your experience was. So, okay, now I'm an adoptee. I always knew I was adopted from like preschool. I can't remember being told. I just knew. I always knew. We all did. There were 4 of us. We always knew. So I cannot even imagine living for decades not knowing. Mm-hmm. So can you tell us what led up to you finally discovering that you had been adopted? And you can share how old you were at the time if you want to.
Sure. 4 years ago, when I was 57, I decided to take a DNA test totally for fun. That and the fact that my mother kept saying, there is a Jewish bloodline running in her side of the family. And growing up as a Catholic kid, I remember hearing, oh, the Jews are the chosen people. And I'd be like, whoa, that is so cool. I want to be one of them. And so that led me to take this DNA test totally for fun and just to see kind of like, how much Jewish I was. Some of my cousins had already taken it, and they were showing up as 40% Jewish. So I thought, okay, here goes. And when I got the DNA test back, it was 3% Jewish. And I was like, what? And then, but the thing was, I was so busy at the time that I looked at it and I didn't pay attention. I just kind of set it aside. If I had paid attention, I would have seen this lady's name in really big letters, capital letters, that it said a potential half sibling. But I think I was just like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'm not Jewish, whatever. So I set it aside. I was on Facebook one day and this message came through, and it was from somebody who had friended me a week before, some man. And the reason we became friends is he seemed to really love animals. I love animals. There you go. And he says to me, you look an awful lot like my wife. And I was like, God, what a flirt. And I just kind of left it alone. And then he kept sending me messages. And I was like, and then he says, don't you think? And he sends me a picture of this woman. And I, having to be funny, I just sort of said to him, I don't see a resemblance, but I think maybe we shop for glasses at the same store. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, ancestry DNA says different. And I thought to myself, whoa, how does he know that? And so it ends up that woman whose name was in capital letters ends up being his wife. But at the time, I still didn't see that it said potential half sibling. So this woman reached out to me, his wife, and said, look, she was very polite, very thoughtful. And she said, I don't want to bother you. I've just been looking for family, and I've never seen family so strongly, like that we are. I mean, that we have so many, like the centimorgans on the sheet are so strong. And she said, maybe you know somebody I might be related to. And she said, I'm not connected. I'm estranged from my mother and my brother, and maybe you know someone. And I looked at all the names she sent me, or the areas of Mexico she was from, which I didn't recognize as where my family came from. So I said, okay, you know what? I don't know anything, but I'll ask my siblings who are older and they might know something. And okay, my siblings and I, whenever we get on the phone with each other, we're laughing all the time about everything. It's just crazy laughter. They were so serious that I was like, okay, I thought, is something wrong? But I mentioned this woman and everybody was like, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. So 2 weeks later, my sister, who I grew up with, comes out to Santa Fe, and she's not in the house for more than 5 minutes. And she starts pulling out these papers out of her purse. And she said, you know what? She said, and she started crying. She can't stop crying. She said, I knew I wouldn't be able to tell you. So I wrote this on the plane like 12 times. And I was like, God, what's happening? What's the wrong? And she pulled them out and she started reading. And then she got to the words, Carlyn, you were adopted. And it was just like one of those moments that feels like you just got in a car accident. Like for me, it started off as a physical reaction of shock. And by that, I mean, I stopped being able to hear what she was saying. I could see her lips moving, but it's like they were muddled. And I remember kind of moving towards her, trying to understand what she was saying because I stopped being able to hear. And what she described was that my adoptive mother in Southern California had gone to visit a friend. And when she was knocking on the door, she could hear this lady crying in the background. And when her friend came to the door, she said, who is that? Do you know this woman? And she said, the friend said, yes, it's my cousin. And she's here from Chicago. And she has 2 kids already. She's not married. And she's got a 3rd one on the way. And she wants me to help her get an abortion. And I am not going to help her. And even if she cries, and my mother literally, I couldn't believe this because after all I've told you about how my mother and I were just at loggerhorns constantly, I hear that my mother pretty much turned around and took this woman, a complete stranger, and her 2 children to live with them and said to her, we will adopt your child, we'll take care of her or, your baby when she comes. And they took care of this woman for 6 months. And these are immigrants who don't have much money. They already have 3 kids that are older. And they did this. And then they tried to give her money to see if she would keep me, but she didn't want to. So, and they didn't really have much money to give her anyway. But they did give her money then to go back to Chicago on the Greyhound. And that's when my mother took my siblings around the cradle and said, this is your new sister. She's adopted. But you're never to tell her she's adopted because people will try to hurt her. And that's how they all became so protective of me. And that's how it all started. So I'll say that it was a massive physical reaction and then the emotional fallout followed. As soon as that layer came out, it was like, I was experiencing every emotion I could ever imagine, from fear to loss to, some anger to, depression to, gratitude to, just everything all at once, everything everywhere all at once.
Did you ask your sister a bunch of questions or were you too stunned to even do that?
At the moment, too stunned. At the moment, and probably, but the next day, she had flown into Santa Fe. And so we went to meet her and her husband at this little restaurant. And the thing is, I was really brought up to not complain, even though I've learned a lot since then, but not to complain and not to show a lot of emotion and to buck it up and this and that. So part of that came into play. Like part of me was going, you have to deal with this in a healthy way. But part of me was thinking, don't make a big deal out of this. This is not that big of a deal. And I'm having these 2 conversations in my head. So I remember leaning over to her when we were having breakfast. And I said, look, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but I think I was just too stunned when you told me. So I have questions. And she said, this is a big deal. You can ask me anything you want for however long you want. And so that felt good because I asked her, I asked her not only question after question, but I repeated the questions over and over and over again. It was like and it took a while, as you might guess, that's pretty traumatic what I went through. So it took a while to move through all of that.
I can't remember how long she stayed for that visit.
She went to see a therapist before. I think that's why there was a 2-week gap. She went to see a therapist to say, hey, what's the best way to deal with it? And so, because she left the next day, and I think maybe the therapist said, you need to give her time. You need to, I think that, because I don't know why she would have left so quickly. But believe me, we were on the phone every day for, I don't know how long, me calling her up. And because part of me was, I was so close with my siblings and I love them so much that okay, this makes no sense, but it is how my mind was at the time, where I started to feel like, gosh, are they kind of like giving me up again? Or am I being pushed out of the fold? Am I supposed to now go have Thanksgiving and Christmas with all these people I don't know? Well, that doesn't make any sense because I know it's not true, but it felt true. So part of me calling her all the time was to make sure we were still connected. It was a thing of like just a security blanket, like, oh, you're still there. You're still there.
That makes total sense. But they were probably trying to give you some space.
I believe
But yet
so.
they had processing to do too. Did they ever say if they felt guilty about holding the secret?
I wrote a book as clearly about everything I was feeling as I possibly could. And I know they've all read it, but I don't know that they even now totally get what I felt like or why it was so big in my life.
Mhm.
And it's like, I got to a certain point that I stopped asking because I thought, okay, that's just their experience and they're not trying to be cruel. They're not trying to be anything. They just don't quite get it the way I get it. And I don't get things that a lot of people go through unless I have the same experience. I might understand it better. So I wouldn't say, nobody has said guilty, but it took 2 years for my sister to finally say the words that I kind of wanted to hear, which is, I'm sorry.
Mm.
I really needed to hear that from somebody.
Mhm.
Because I felt like, well, I don't want to make you say I'm sorry, but if it were me, I'd say I'm sorry, like I'm sorry, I did my best, and
Right.
whatever that is.
Okay, so your parents have been gone for a while.
A
How
while.
how were you feeling all of a sudden about your parents? As you're processing this information, you had to be having some thoughts about them.
Well, it was this complete turnaround with my mother because we had so many issues as a teenager, when I was a teenager, she and I'm butting heads all the time. And, a lot of that did fade away over time. But you know what? Part of that physical reaction I had, of not being able to hear my sister say something got worse when I heard the words, that my birth mother wanted an abortion, because I suddenly realized, whoa, I was on the precipice. I almost was in the abyss. I almost wasn't alive. And I feel very strongly about reproductive rights for women. But it's weird coming from the other side. Like, I'm not a fetus. I'm a grown human who's had this whole life and a very I find fulfilling life. And it's hard to imagine not having it. So that was a weird thing to kind of look back on. And of course, I've forgotten your question that got me here.
How did you feel towards your parents? Did
Oh, yeah.
you feel differently toward them, or were you angry with them?
Oddly,
Angry with the
no.
dead person, isn't that, they say you can't be angry with, or shouldn't be angry with the dead or whatever, but
I was perfectly willing to feel whatever emotion was coming through. And oddly, I was surprised because I grew up in my 20s. I was probably one of the more angrier people you'd meet, but I was really good at keeping it down. But I was angry. I was angry about a lot of things. But now it was odd. I was surprised, like, why am I not angry? Everybody's asking me why I'm not angry. And I just don't feel angry. What I did feel was, and the reason I was explaining that whole thing about standing on the precipice was, my mom saved me. She saved my life. She pulled me out. She was the one. If it hadn't been for her, not that I would have known everything, any better if I was the result of an abortion. But to be honest, I felt profound gratitude in that moment, and which isn't to erase our past and all of the issues we had with each other, but boy, was I grateful in that moment, because I realized I wouldn't have been alive. My birth mother did not want me in any possible way. And then I did meet her not long after, and she was somebody who was very mentally ill, and she didn't seem to really be very loving to the 2 children she kept. I did meet the woman with the capital letters, ended up being my half sister, the one that was on the DNA test.
Yes,
She ended up being my half sister. And she told me about life with the birth mother. And to this day, my husband and I think to ourselves, would you have even been alive if she had kept you? Because she never hugged or any of those children. She didn't tell them that she loved them, nothing. She went around with a chain and was hitting them and stuff like that. And I would have been the youngest by a lot.
Mhm.
So what would my life have been with a woman like that, who was supposedly hopping around to dingy hotels and, getting evicted from places? So I will say I was grateful.
Mhm.
And I know that's a tough thing sometimes because not everybody experience, I don't want people to tell me that I need to feel grateful, but
Right.
I do feel it.
There's a difference when someone expects it from
Oh,
us,
yeah.
or if we ourselves express that emotion. So, okay, so
Yes.
let's back up a minute. This half sister. So,
Yes.
initially, I think you were like messaging her or emailing, but then you talked. Oh, the 2 week period. Okay, so what did you do for the first 2 weeks after you heard the news?
Um, okay, well, I didn't quite have it together. I was pretty like stunned. So I reverted to very healthy habits like eating vegan chocolate chip cookies and drinking lots of root beer and watching The Walking Dead on television over and over again. And it just because I was obviously trying to self-medicate and trying to just sleep as much as possible because it was just so shocking. So literally for about a week and a half there, that's what I was doing. And then I finally got it together one day and said, I can't just keep going in this direction. This is not helping my waistline. And, it's not helping my sleep to watch The Walking Dead on TV every night. So for those 2 weeks, it was sort of unhealthy habits. And then week 2 popped in. And then I was like, okay, I've got to get this together. And I thought to myself, okay, I've been through other things in the past, not quite like this, but not losing your identity suddenly and having that just fracture. But I have been through a divorce that was painful. I've lost both my parents. How did I cope with those things in healthy ways? And so I kind of compiled a little resiliency toolkit and decided that one of the most important things I needed to do was feel whatever I was experiencing, whether it was anger or gratitude or sadness or loss, whatever came in, because there were just one emotion after the other. They just kept, I'm like, fine, I'll ride that wave because I have been somebody who has pushed down my emotions and not experienced them in the past. And boy, that's a terrible way to live for me. So I was like, okay, I will honor whatever I'm feeling and then escort it out as soon as possible. And in the process, I journaled, I did as many things as I could. But simultaneously, life was unraveling in other ways, suddenly discovering I didn't know my birth mother was alive. And I found out she was not only alive. A couple of weeks later, I found out not only that she was alive, but she was in a state hospital in Chicago on hospice. So if I was going to meet her, 3 days later, I'm hopping on a plane. So like 2.5 weeks and 3 days later from discovering I'm adopted, I'm on a plane to Chicago to meet my birth mother.
Okay, now what I found really interesting was that this half sister who was looking for family needed some prodding to figure out the connection, the real connection between you two, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's an interesting thing because she would have been 7 years old when I was born, but she didn't remember. I started telling her what I had discovered. And I will say that I was sort of reluctant to call because I was feeling very traumatized and destabilized myself. But I felt bad for her. Here she'd been looking all her life for somebody who she might be related to, and it ends up being me. And I didn't feel like I could go an extra day without telling her. So I did wait a week, but I called her. And when I started telling her what I had discovered, it was like her memory. It was a like steamroller. She's like, I remember your mother. I remember your sister. I remember your sister would catch these lizards and let them go. I remember. It's like she remembered so many things and in fact, I thought to myself, maybe she's making it up. But then she started remembering things she could never have known unless she was there. And, and I was like, wow. And so it was like the floodgates opened for her. And she said to me, I didn't know that my birth mother was pregnant. I just sort of thought, and I didn't know there was a baby, but I felt like I knew something. And I thought there was something missing. And now I know it was you. So.
How much older was your brother then?
3 years older than me.
Wow.
But this is the other thing that's so strange. And that's why I just am thinking, God, there were so many weirdly cosmic things going on during this discovery. For example, 2 weeks after, I discovered all of this, she called me back and I spoke with my half sister. She called me back like a week later, something like that. And she said, "You're not going to believe this." She said, "But a lawyer contacted me, and I guess that brother had died, and they had been looking for his relatives and they found her. And the thing was that's when we discovered that my birth mother was alive. If he hadn't died, and he would just be estranged and we never would have known that." And I'm like, of all the time, suddenly she finds this out right now, a week after she finds out all this. It's just such crazy timing.
Yes, really, it really is. It's interesting that, so a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old or
4-year-old. Yeah, I think he was
4-year-old.
4. Yeah, four.
Yeah.
4.
Probably just blocked out a lot of things that happened in their life, but the doors started opening when there all of a sudden you were, and then they're remembering your whole family and all of that. That's just really incredible. So how long did you have to think about, do I want to go meet my mother, who is in, did you already say it? I think you already said it, in a mental institution in Chicago.
Well, she was on, it wasn't a mental, it was, what did I call it? It was like state hospital.
Oh, okay,
State
that's
hospital,
right.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. I'm not a very patient person. And if I find something, it's like, I need to know. And part of all this process is I felt so just like Humpty Dumpty who fell off the wall and all the pieces scattered. I had this urgency inside of me to put all the pieces back together again as soon as possible, because everything that's happened since, your family to me is like the foundation of you, and everything gets piled on it. So I sort of felt like everything fell apart, was falling, and I was doing my best to put it together. So every clue, anything anybody presented to me, I was like, okay, I need to know, just tell me, and I was like writing it down and putting it together, and that would be a piece in the foundation that would put back. So my half sister said to me, "I found out our birth mother is alive. She's in the state hospital in Chicago. She's on hospice, which means not a lot of time left." And I said to her, because she hadn't seen her in 20 years. And I said, "Are you going to see her?" And she said, "I was thinking about it. Do you want to come?" And of course I was going to say yes immediately, but I was trying to like play it cool. I'm like, "Oh, let me think about it," which, I know me. So I hung up the phone and I thought about it for 10 seconds, told my husband and called her back and said, "Yeah, I'm in." So yeah, this was part of the adventure.
I can't imagine this timeline. It is all so fast.
So fast.
My own timeline, I had more time to process, which I'm thinking I am so glad that I did. I thought of it even then, but as I listened to your story, I think it even more. I had more time to process, because these kind of things, there's no guidebook for how to deal with this. And you're right, those siblings, they will never completely get it because it wasn't their experience. They didn't go through this like you. So you and your half sister go on a trip. Now, where did she live at this time? I forget.
Well, she lives in Missouri, so she met me there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was it like?
Well, I said to her, because this is the thing, it's like I needed, even though I wanted information, I also needed a little space. It was so I did my best when I got there. I didn't want to meet her immediately. I just needed to go decompress in my hotel room and just decompress. And so, but it was really only an hour. I think the plane was a little delayed, so it was like only an hour. So I got to the restaurant in the hotel sooner than her because I just wanted to sit down. I wanted to pick the table. I wanted to be I think it's a control thing. I just needed to be in control. And then she comes walking through the door, and the first thing I think I thought of was, hey, she's wearing the outfit I was going to wear tomorrow. It was like black leggings and a blue top.
This is your half sister.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. And she sat down, and I'm a pretty gregarious person. But I could tell I was pretty reserved, I was trying to, I was polite and nice, but I was reserved. And I think we both knew we're just taking in every single detail of each other. And then we started talking, and, even to this day, I mean, we get along quite well. We do, but I'll tell you, the difference is, and again, it has to do with everything was happening so fast. Maybe if it had been 6 months before I met her, I would have been in a different place. But here I was, 2 weeks later, I had just found out this massive secret that was my identity, and I wasn't who I thought I was. So I'm coming from this space, that is very much like taking a step forward, but each time there's something big in front of me. And she's coming from a completely different space, which is, oh my God, I have a sister. This is so great. So she's moving towards me and I'm sort of moving back, and she's moving towards and I'm moving back. So this was a conversation we had to have later because she was so happy and so excited. And I was kind of the opposite, like, what's happening? This is, crazy. But, we get along quite well.
So how much time did you spend together before you visited the hospital?
It was just, an hour and a half, 90 minutes for dinner. And then the next day we got together and we went to go visit. I guess my birth mother had a sister in Chicago, and she wanted to see her because I guess she had done a lot for them growing up because, the birth mother was a little kind of out of it. And so we went to meet her, and I just remember she hugged Martha, my half sister, and she was just staring at me over her shoulder. She's just looking at me, like looking me up and down. And then I remember her first words to me weren't hello, how are you, or anything. It was like, we didn't know anything about you. And that was the first thing she said. And so she was kind of a trip, but she had some details too, about who she was, where they came from. And she just, she was an interesting character.
So probably nobody knew.
Nobody knew.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, Martha and your brother knew, but it was buried in there.
Yeah, but they didn't really remember. If Martha didn't remember, he was never going to remember. Yeah. And even my sister, my adoptive sister, who was, how old would she have been at the time? She was 9 at the time. I said, Lily, didn't you know she was like pregnant? And she said, no, I just thought she was getting fat. That lady. And then she said, suddenly you weren't there and then you were there. And she didn't really think about it.
Yeah. Okay. So meeting birth mom.
Yes. So the state hospital experience is an experience unto its own. As soon as I walked in there, there just seemed like there was so many patients inside wandering around, and people with dementia too. And, I remember a lady coming up to me and just taking my hand, and she was very sweet. She goes, oh, you've come to visit me, and she thought I was somebody else. And then she'd come up to me again and go, oh, thank you for visiting me. And so you would talk to them, and then I'd hear some man over there in the corner yelling, help me, help me. And I'm like, oh my God, this is just so strange. And then I saw an orderly pushing my birth mother towards us. And again, my first reaction was, that cannot be my mother, because she didn't look anything like me. To me, I was like, she looks like a little Irish elf. I don't look like an Irish elf. I mean, I'm not like skin like that and all of that. And so, but she was pretty out of it. Not only was she mentally ill, she had dementia pretty badly. She didn't even know who Martha was. She didn't. And so I kind of took the role of observing. I really felt like an observer. I was just watching her, and then I'd watch Martha and the aunt, and then I'd watch all these people, milling around me. And I remember thinking, why do I not feel a connection to this woman? If she gave birth to me, why don't I feel anything? I mean, I feel like I'm a compassionate, empathetic person, and I meet strangers and I feel a connection. Why don't I feel anything? And so I decided, I had been an acupuncturist for a number of years. And part of my, the technique you use is you touch people and you feel something like, oh, that energy's a little low, or that energy's like too much, or what's, and I thought, okay, I'm going to reach over so gently and touch her, and then I will feel a connection to my birth mother. That's what I thought would happen. And the thing was, she didn't want anybody to touch her. She was like, kept pushing people away, like, don't touch me. And so I thought, okay, I'll do it when she's not looking. And so I was sitting next to her and I just leaned over as lightly as I could. I just remember just touching the back of her hand. And it took her about 10 seconds and suddenly she knew. And then she just kind of flicked me like that. And I still didn't feel anything. I felt nothing. And to this day, it sort of floors me that I didn't feel anything. So that's what it was. Still is a little befuddling, but that's what that was.
What about Martha? What did she feel that day? Did she share with you?
She's pretty even keel, and Martha has her own family and children and some grandchildren. And I think she was just pretty even keeled. Like, you would think she would be more reactive, but I think that's just how she is. She hadn't seen her mother. I have to give her a lot of credit, because when she has told me the details of her upbringing, she's also said, I've let it go. You know, I forgive my mother for being how she was. You know, I have my own family and that's what she was. And all right, that's what happened. And so she has, and I hear it, and she's definitely forgiven that and moved on. And so she was pretty cool. I didn't see a lot of emotion one way or the other.
Okay.
But one thing I will share with you, which is pretty amazing, the aunt that I met, really hard as rock. I mean, somebody who worked her whole life really hard, and she's pretty just tough as nails. And I was standing there next to my birth mother, who was in the big wheelchair. And all of a sudden she said something. She said, "Can you ever forgive her?" And I looked up at her, and here's this woman who's tough as anything, and she's crying. She's got tears in her eyes. And I said, "What?" She says, "Can you ever forgive her for what she did to you?" And it was that moment that I just really flashed on my whole life. And I thought, I had parents who really loved me, and a whole family who really loves me and still love me. And they gave me opportunities I never would have had I gone this other route. I never would have met my husband, who I adore. I've had a great education. I mean, all of these things have happened for me that would not have happened had I gone to live in Chicago. And so I looked up at her and I said, "You know what? There's nothing to forgive, nothing." And I remember her just sort of smiling and just nodding, and that was that.
Have you remained in contact with her, the aunt?
No, I have not. I sort of feel like Martha has, and she kind of shares information, and we kind of use her as a mediary. For somebody like, I want to know the truth about everything. I need to know. But at a certain point, I kind of got it. I got to a point of, okay, Martha's my half sister. She's included in my family. And yes, I met this woman, but you know what? I have a massive family. I have a lot of people in it, and that is what feels like family to me. I mean, if she reached out, that would be something else, but I just feel like this is my family. And yeah, I don't know who my birth father is, but I had an amazing father, and I feel like that's my father. So I'm okay with not knowing anything else. If somebody else comes up on Ancestry, DNA, and they're like a first cousin or something, yeah, then maybe. But
okay. I'm a search angel, so if you ever change your mind, send me a message, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So, I don't want Carlyn to tell her entire story, and believe me, there's lots more in the book, because you will want to get this book. This book is winning awards right and left, which I think is so incredible. It's so incredible that your story, it's so well written and it's being recognized, but every one of us, when our story is told, we are bringing awareness to what adoption really is, and all of the complexities and the things that we deal with that other people will never get. So we are going to go to question and answer time now, because I am sure there are several people who have questions for you. So Jennifer, if you want to go ahead and stop.